Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am Pervez Khan, Assistant Professor in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Kohat University of Science and Technology. The subject is National International Affairs. The course code is JMC 341. It's our lecture number 12, which is Globalization. So before we start our session, we'll be talking about objectives, that what the students will gain after attending the session. So they'll be able to understand the dynamics of globalization and how it shapes our current world. Students will be also able to understand the effects it has, especially how it affects human lifestyle, decision making, and employment related issues. And it also understand both the positive and negative aspects of globalization. So along with explaining the term globalization, we are going to have and we're going to have a detailed session on the impact it has on global economies, on cultures, how it's affecting us, what are the pros and cons of globalization. So yes, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to globalization from dynamic perspective. And one thing which is very important in social sciences is that we cannot stick to just one particular definition of anything because phenomena keep changing, keeps being challenged by different new theories. So we have to look at issues from dynamic perspectives. So let's look at this globe. As you can see, that since the topic is globalization, so the image that we have is of globe, and people are there from different cultures, and how the world has changed with technology. And one thing we need to know is that the world is more interconnected than ever, and therefore it becomes very very important to understand the world from dynamic perspective. It's very important to understand the world around us. So this is the true purpose of discussing these issues, particularly in social sciences, that we need a holistic picture to understand how things work. And globalization is also the same topic. You cannot just define it in few terms. You need to have a look from dynamic perspective, from a holistic way, to understand how it works. It's not as simple as it may seem. It's not just about definitions, but it's more important to understand how it works. So when talking about globalization, it's important that we look at it from the interaction, communication, and transaction perspective. And it's important to understand that our transaction, communication, and interactions have changed over the years. This is a key point. We can see how communication used to take place 200 years ago. It's completely changed. The letters, the posting of letters has changed to emails, and how interactions has changed in relation to the how global transactions are taking place. What is e-economy? What is online services? All have changed over the course of, and particularly in the last 50 years or so, especially after the advent of internet, things have changed. And with one click, we can order burgers, and we can order lots of commodities online through different platforms. You can take example of Food Panda, which where you can just order food and it arrives at your doorstep. Similarly, in abroad, where you can buy books through Amazon, or you can in Pakistan you can use the popular platforms like Daraz. You must have seen many others as well, where you can order and you can see goods arriving at your doorstep. This is what has changed over the years. It was never thought of before. Like 20 years ago, this wasn't even possible, but it's happening now. It's e-commerce. It's having a very strong impact. It's going faster. Things are changing and becoming much more speedier. And similarly, how did we come to this? Like uh, the burgers at the doorsteps, or the international brands that we are using today. This is a very good question to ask, that how it happened. Like, how did the world interconnect, and what are the origins, or where is it going in the coming future? So we'll be talking about this, about globalization first. First, we need an understanding of what globalization is. That is it related to market? Is it related to interconnectivity? Is it more about integration? So one of the definitions, or how we can describe globalization, is that it occurs when the markets of different countries become more integrated and interconnected through economic transactions that cross national borders. An important point here is integrated and interconnected through economic transactions. And without borders, like the concept of borders, the crossing through is changed. It's much more about interaction. It's like a transnational borders where you can go anywhere. You're a global citizen. You can just have transactions anywhere. You can just click online. You can purchase anything in America, or Americans can do buy some Eastern traditional stuff from Pakistan. They can order it from there. It's just global world. This is one way to look at it. This is not the perfect definition, but it explains that it occurs when countries become more integrated and interconnected through economic transactions, where there are no, where through cross national borders, and where there are no physical demarcations of borders over there. And uh, another way to look at it is that globalization occurs like when there's it's another way to look at it is that when it's an extraordinarily powerful complex phenomena with multiple sources, carriers, and impact. And we have to look at it that globalization is the word used to describe the growing interdependencies of world economies, cultures, and population brought about by cross border trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment, people, and information. It's very important to look at it that the goods and services and technology and flows of information and people, that's very important to look at it because this is what matters when we talk about goods, services, technologies, flow of investment, people, and information. It includes all of it. When people migrate from one country to another, that's also part of globalization. When investment takes place cross border, that's also part of globalization, goods, services, and particularly in the age of information, when information is crossing the borders, that is also globalization. And moreover, it's important to look at the concept that this phenomenon of globalization is not something new. And it has existed in the past, especially in conquest and invasions, where conquerors would come and bring their own influence and culture with them. If you look at Arab culture, if you look at Greek culture, if you look at the Silk Route or the Mongols, whatever was happening in the past was also part of globalization because one civilization was having an impact on another civilization, but that was too slow, and that is considered. You can say that is not considered in modern globalization, but it gives us some basic concepts of how migration was taking place, how the way people were working, the concept, the ideas. It was all part of globalization, but it was slow in nature. But when we talk about the modern phenomena, it comes of let's talk about the first wave of globalization, which is roughly estimated to be between 1870 and 1915. And it was mainly because of the development of technology. And you can see that the globalization was fueled by technology such as telegraph, steamships, railroads, and they were all providing interconnectivity and speed at the both at the same time. This was the breakthrough period, and this is why industrial period was revolutionized and the increasing economic cooperation between the countries was witnessed. So this was the turning point. But then eventually it came to a standstill during the World War One and Two. It really affected the globalization process. But once again, after the World War II in mid 1940s, the United States led effort to revive international trade and investment, and under negotiated grounds started a second wave of globalization, which is considered to be still ongoing. That was a turning point. After World War, many European and advanced countries realized that the war has been there for too long. It's time for economic change. It's time for economic prosperity, and for this purpose, they set up giant organizations, and that's what led to global. That's also led to the global inventions of, sorry, global discussions of modern economy and how everything changed. And then it led to the technological advancement in the later stage in the post 1980s, where technologies such as internet revolutionized the world. And this is what's very important, like the connectivity, the internet, the satellites, everything changed the way transactions and communications were taking place. It gave birth to faster economies, faster exchange, faster communication between countries, companies, individuals. This is what we witnessed in 1980s, and that's how it's changing especially with the advent of broadband, and now we can see the mega speeds of internet. Everything is changing, and even is changing the shape of how education were taking place. Especially look at pandemic, how everything changed despite being the schools and colleges and universities being closed down. The efforts are being there through online communication, the online discussions, and several platforms are used. So interconnectivity is there, which made the connection possible. And that's debatable how effective or ineffective that is, but that's a separate debate. But we can talk about that it provided an alternate platforms for different commodities and different organizations and different, obviously, walks of life that we can witness. And similarly, it was Marshall McLuhan, one of the first guys who was talking about the global village back in 1960s. And I would like to share one of his quotes here uh, that the new electronic independence recreates the world in the image of a global village. And he coined the term global village. Like the world is more interconnected, the world, he talked about global village and that how people from different cultures, from different low context, high context culture will be communicating. This is what he indicated. And there's another quote of him is that ours is a brand new world all at once, and time has ceased, space has vanished. We now live in a global village, a simultaneous happening. Information pours upon us instantaneously and continuously. As soon as information is acquired, it is very rapidly replaced by still new information. And now, while McLuhan was writing this in Medium, in the message, it's a remarkable thought that he put forward before internet, and he didn't live to see this, but surprisingly, he's talking about a global world which is much more interconnected and there's flow of information. And he says that it will be replaced by new information. And perhaps he was referring to social media, that once the information is there, it is replaced by new information. Every time, every little moment, there are changes and the new information is there. The speed is there. I think McLuhan was had foreseen the future, and this is what makes him very relevant to communication studies. It's a big name in communication studies. How he talked about the senses being the extensions of humans, and like he says that our body parts are the extensions of the media itself. And like for example, he talks about the eye. Eye he refers to camera. So I think many people have written about globalization, but McLuhan is one of those people who had foreseen future, who had coined the term global village in a way. And in fact, he's considered to be using this term quite frequently, although it has many origins, but it is attributed to him when it comes to the field of communication. And how he discusses it, that the information will be replaced by new information, is remarkable, especially if you're a journalist. You must read one of this book, The Medium is the Message. McLuhan's book it's very, very relevant to our field of communication. But anyway, we'll be talking back to subject which is communication, and let's talk about the 20th century. And in 20th century, after the World War II, several countries joined the now developed United States, Canada, and Australia, and other economies to establish a global system for integration that might include episode like it. And then the important thing is that the globalization also brought in forward some of the big organizations such as International Monetary Fund, which is the IMF, the World Bank, and significantly the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which became the World Trade Organization. These are some mega institutions that were formed as a result of globalization. Now, it really changed the way transactions were taking place between countries. It regulated in many areas. Some also considered it as a Western domination or weaker nations, but this is what globalization brought forward. Now we'll be talking about advantages and disadvantages of globalization, and obviously there are many advantages as well. And experts believe that it increases trade and economic exchanges. It leads to benefits. How you can see the trade volumes and exchanges over the years have taken place. Before, countries were isolated. There was less transaction between two places or two countries. But now there are ample opportunities for smaller states to negotiate with bigger ones, or the bigger ones hiring the smaller ones. And this is what's happening, that it's increased the trade volume and overall economic exchanges around the world. And it has provided big market opportunities and cultural diversity as well. And this is what some countries are following. In countries like Canada and other countries, the brain drain is taking place in developing countries, where they're going to more modern countries like Canada, where they're hiring people from different cultures for diversity. And they believe that some people from different areas, they may be good in particular sectors. They may have better mind for mathematics or astronomy or whatever. So cultural diversity is also providing big opportunity when it comes to globalization, when there's interconnectivity, and it's part of global exchange that it has also caused changes in income and salaries, because you're aware of basic living standards around the world. big companies offer good salaries as well. If you're working for international, multinational corporation, obviously it affects your salaries, your way of life. It also affects your culture. That's a difference. It comes definitely with there are some perks and benefits in that. And apart from that, wide talent to pool, from integrated markets are there that you can see a wide pool over there. You can select people for particular skill sets, and you can also send the products to weaker economies, or for cheaper wages or lower wages, where you can find cheap labor and produce your garments, and which can benefit the countries with the weaker economies, that high investment when it takes place in their country. So there's a wide pool available and wide market available, and it also adds to the access to the global technology and global opportunity as well. And along with that, it adds to the availability and affordability, that you can have any kind of product available to you at your doorstep. China has changed that by becoming one of the global exporters in the world. And the products which used to be very expensive in the past, for example, one of the example is wall clock. Japanese wall clock used to be very expensive, but now Chinese have made it really affordable to accessible to everyone with low income. So this is what the change has brought with globalization, that the products are available and they are affordable at the same time. So these are some of the advantages. But on the other hand, we can talk about the serious disadvantages that it brings with itself. Like, for example, the domination of economically powerful nations over the weaker ones, and similarly, more imports or exports after local economy, the environmental issues, threats to local agriculture. These are some of the big threats that is causing that the prices of international community commodities are cheaper compared to the local agriculture prices. Similarly, the exploitation of labor, for example, you can utilize labor, you can utilize production. Then it's the neo-capitalism is one of the disadvantages, that the economies in the modern world requires you to be survival of the fittest. And then similarly, the corporations versus small businesses. That's one primary concern, that if you're having a small business, how you are going to fight along with the bigger corporations. So yes, these are some of the disadvantages. And obviously, one of the big criticism is the domination of economically powerful nations over the weaker ones, because it seems like globalization has benefited the already developed countries more compared to the developing or the poor countries. And this is one serious criticism on globalization, that and it also happens because there are more imports compared to the exports, which affects the local economy. And moreover, there are environmental issues as well, because if the world is getting globalized, it's more about more production, it's about more factories, it's about more damaging the environment. And we have seen it in recent times as well, that how the shutdown of factories for a few months changed the environmental situation around the world, especially in COVID-19, how it changed it. So yes, globalization has led to the global expansionism of all kinds of goods and products, but it has environmental threats, it has threats to the local agriculture, and it's more about survival of the fittest, because fighting bigger corporations is never easy. Multinational corporations are strong, they can afford investments, and it can cause problems for the newer ones. The slides couldn't come in bullets, but I think I've explained it in detail. Then this is what we talked about, advantages and disadvantages, and we'll be talking more about the other slides as well in the coming days about globalization. But I hope that we discussed in detail that what globalization is, and I hope that what did we learn from the session is that the world is more interconnected than ever, and there is high level of flow of goods and information. That it also self-explanatory that globalization is not just about disadvantages; it also brings in advantages, and there's both sides to the coin, and we can't just ignore one side or the other. And then obviously there are environmental and existential challenges for the future. Globalization brings itself a lot of challenges, but that needs to be seen from a wider perspective. And obviously, the concept of borders between countries is changing, and there's transnational borders and the transnational economies and e-economy, and it's more about the virtual world, but it has an impact on the real world. So it's a very detailed topic. I hope you understand the basics of how transactions take place, the flow of information, the flow of goods, and exchanges on the world scale. It's like a global village is taking place, and the world is interconnected, and we all are connected. One of the latest example is that when COVID-19 took place, it shook the whole world. It was not just one country or one area or one region. The impact was global. The economy was affected globally. The businesses went down globally. The GDP to growth ratio went down globally. It was not just confined to one country. So this explains the phenomena that the world is more interconnected than ever. Now we have some questions for students that what do you think about globalization and how do you see it particularly in Pakistani context? Do you think it's affecting us in one way or the other? And similarly, how can we ensure Pakistan's development through globalization? So these are some of the questions you can ask yourself and think about it, because this will what make you better thinker, particularly make you global citizen, will make you think about how you can survive in neo-capitalistic times, which are challenging, which requires being survival of the fittest. It's a very serious term, but this is how the world is going to be. It's becoming much more difficult and challenging at the same time. So these are the references that we've used. We've also used certain books, and then we'll be discussing this in the future as well. So I hope you enjoyed the session. We'll be talking more detail. Maybe perhaps we take an online session as well, especially some dedicated time slot for this, where you can ask me some questions and we can also clarify in this one. So I hope you enjoyed the session. We'll be in touch. Thank you very much.